Hey viewers, my name's Cara. We are sitting in the shade in my backyard by our lilac bush that is practically a tree. I wanted to sit in the nice warm sunshine, but it's far too bright over there and I don't want my phone to overheat while recording, so we're in the shade. But I'm still wearing my sun hat because it's a new gift from my partner's mom and I think it's cute. So today I want to talk about one of the books that I have finally finished reading. It is When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir by Patrisse Khan-Cullors, as it says here, or if you look them up on social media now, it actually says Patrisse Cullors-Brignac, so a different combination of their names, same person. Patrisse is one of the black women who founded the Black Lives Matter movement. She's actually the one, or they are actually the one. I don't remember what Patrisse's pronouns are, so I'll use they just to be safe. Patrisse is queer, a queer black woman, and well, that's one of the first things that I was surprised to learn reading this book, because I really didn't know much about the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement, other than it was formed in response to police brutality and other violence against black people. And it was specifically started after the death of Trayvon Martin. So that was in 2013. But Patrisse is actually the one who first used the hashtag, and then she or they and their friends, Alicia and Opal, went from there and decided it needed to be something bigger. So I actually haven't seen this book being recommended a lot of different places. A few different places have been recommending this book, but actually the way that I ended up with it is that my partner already has read it previously, before this year, and works for the library system, and we already had this book in our house before quarantine. So as you can see here, it is a library book, but it was already in our possession before the COVID-19 pandemic quarantine set in here in our state. We are in the Cleveland area of Ohio, and my partner actually was present at some of the first big Black Lives Matter events that took place in Cleveland. The one in particular that's mentioned in this book was in 2015. And back then, I had sort of a vague awareness of the Black Lives Matter movement, but I can tell you it was not something that was enough on my radar that I even really knew that particular big event was happening. And Patrisse talks about it in this book, and my partner was there, and other people that I know were there. So reading this has definitely felt like tying up loose ends of various things that I had seen and heard in some ways, but it's also just a really amazing personal account. It is a memoir. It's by one of the women who founded this movement, so it's talking about their life and their personal lived experiences, what has happened with their family and the police, where they have lived throughout their life, and their relationships and struggles and joys, all different kinds of things. And then interspersed throughout the book are things like those big major actions, those Black Lives Matter events, the movement for Black Lives gathering. That's the one that was in Cleveland in, I think it was 2015. It doesn't give the year here, but it gives the year before that and some events that happened after that. So, and my partner said they think it was 2015. So context clues, it was probably around then. It also intersperses facts and statistics and personal stories, just little snippets of what has happened to other victims of police brutality, of transphobic violence, all of these different things. So, recently in the news, there are some really big names that most people have heard. If you've been on the internet or, certain things that have been covered by certain news outlets, there are some big names that people know about. And I think there are some big names that we're familiar with from the Black Lives Matter movement overall. I already mentioned Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice was from Cleveland, Ohio. Mike Brown, Eric Garner. And then more recently, people like George Floyd. And one of the other things that is talked about in this book is the hashtag/movement Say Her Name, which was begun, and again, this is something that I never thought about before. I've seen the hashtag, I've used the hashtag, but before reading this book and the chapter in here that is about Say Her Name, it never really occurred to me that it was specifically founded by someone to make visible what was happening to femme victims of violence, particularly black women, excuse me. A lot of the names that were really big in the news were names of men and boys, but there have also been women and girls, and now we're hearing more names, hashtag say their names, of queer and trans and gender non-conforming individuals who have also been victims of violence. Hydrate. So one of the things that I also really appreciated about this book is that, again, interspersed throughout Patrisse's own lived experiences and, the very much memoir part of this book, are those little mentions of, and I say little because it's only a couple of sentences about each person some of the time. Sometimes it's a much longer account of something that's happened to someone else that has been lost. But often it's just a couple sentences, but it's telling the story of someone whose name was not put out there as much in the media. So when we talk about say her name, say their names, some of the big names that we've all seen, or many of us probably have seen, are names like Breonna Taylor. And then from the trans community, we have Tony McDade, Dominique Fells, Rhea Milton, who is also from Ohio. And recently also Elijah McClain, Toyin, Brayla, and so many others that I'm not even going to be able to think of right this second. But going through this book, which is by St. Martin's Press, is that right? Yeah, St. Martin's Press, and it was published in 2017, so it's not very old, but just in the past few years, there are so many other names now, unfortunately, added to that list of beloved dead and mighty dead. So even in this book, Patrisse names a lot of names that I know I had never heard their stories before between 2013 and 2017 when this book came out. And a couple of the stories she tells of people who lost their lives to anti-black violence, anti-trans violence, were actually from further in the past, relatively, not in the 2000s, not in the 2010s decade. Yeah, I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about that. That's because that's one of the elements that I didn't necessarily expect to be in the book, that I really appreciated being in the book, because as much as it can be difficult sometimes to read the individual details of these horrible things that have happened, have been happening, are happening, and likely will continue to happen. I mean, we are seeing it happen now that people are able to share these things on the internet and social media directly, and we're not only relying on what is the mainstream news source going to actually deem worthy to talk about, but now that we're able to listen to, and I mean, we've been able to listen to individual people for a while, but now that it's even more widely being shared, and we are specifically seeking out certain voices, educators, individuals, organizations, community-led groups, we are able to see and hear more of these things right when they happen. And that wouldn't necessarily be the case if we were only relying on mainstream media. So like my mom, who only watches mainstream news, doesn't hear about most of this stuff. So she hears about it from me, So I really appreciate Patrisse also spending some time interspersing throughout this book names of other people who need to be remembered, names of people whose lives mattered, whose lives were not treated like they mattered at all. And that's what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. I think a lot of people have heard a lot of propaganda about Black Lives Matter that is majoritively just not true. And so, as I said, I haven't necessarily seen this book recommended everywhere by everybody, but I'm going to recommend it to you because, again, I only got a chance to read it right this second because it was already in my house, but I'm very glad that I did. And I actually started reading this at the same time that I started reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. But one of my friends who also just read this book said that it went very quickly because it's a memoir. And so I thought, okay, let me go ahead and start that then, and maybe I can actually get a book finished here, because I've said previously on this channel that since pandemic, I, normally a very fast reader, very avid reader, should go through tons and tons of books in a relatively short amount of time, I have had trouble focusing on books. I have had trouble reading, which is very unusual for me. But although I didn't go through this book in a couple of days, which I probably very well could have if I really just didn't stop reading, I did finish this book in a relatively short amount of time, probably just a few weeks. And it's easy to read in the sense that it's a memoir. You're reading someone's personal story. It's not a lot of dense statistical information to get through. It's incredibly accessible because it's like you're sitting in a room with Patrisse telling you, this is what happened to my community. This is what happened to my brother. This is what happened to my friend. This is what happened to this young boy across the country who I look at and I think he could be my nephew. He could be my child, you know? So it's very accessible in that way. That's why I say it's an easy read. However, it is also a very important and weighty subject. So I don't want to say, oh, it's an easy read as though it's some kind of light reading, right? It's a serious topic. And as I mentioned, it talks about, well, real issues, but also real things that have happened to real people and that continue to happen, and that many of us have had the privilege of being ignorant of for most, if not all, of our lives. So, as soon as I sort of got a hold of this book, I mean, it's been in my house, but as soon as I picked it up and decided I should read this, my partner had already read it, I followed Patrisse on social media, and I actually started seeing people sharing a post that is a photo of Patrisse and Alicia and Opal talking about how Black Lives Matter, the movement, was founded and led and built up into the sort of global network that it is now by Black women, by Black queer women. It is a queer and trans and Black-led organization. And that is not something I had ever known about it before. I did not expect to open up this book and hear Patrisse talk about her or their experience being a queer Black person and their relationships and all of it. So, you know, there's a lot that was unexpected in this book, and not just in the, oh my God, I can't believe these horrible things have happened way, but in really delightful ways as well. I feel like I know Patrisse's life. You know, obviously I know consciously that I can't possibly know all of it, because not all of it went into this book, but a lot is shared here that gives a lot of perspective. And so I just want to say a big thank you to Patrisse and also to Asha for helping this book come into existence. And I mean, of course, obviously, Patrisse and Asha acknowledged a ton of other people who helped make the book possible, who helped make the movement possible, other organizers, people who started different Black Lives Matter chapters around the country and in other countries as well. My partner and I have since done some research, and we found out that there is no official Black Lives Matter chapter in Cleveland or in all of the state of Ohio. But I know that there are community organizers here in our area who have been hosting events, and they consider them part of the wider Black Lives Matter movement, but there is no official BLM chapter, at least not that we have found. We went to the official website where they list their official chapters. And so as far as our research so far, there isn't one here in the state of Ohio, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there doing this work. You know, that's another big takeaway, I think, from this book and probably many of the other anti-racist books written by Black people that many of us are probably reading right now, is that this is not a new concept. A lot of us might be hearing about it for the first time right now, or very recently, or like for me, this is an issue that I first, I guess, started becoming more consciously aware of in terms of the actual activism and social justice movements and organizations behind it within the past few years. Basically, when I got involved or started getting involved with the reclaiming tradition, which is my tradition of witchcraft, of paganism, and it is activism centered, it is social justice based, you know, that's part of it. So for me, like the concept of anti-racism and decolonization, that's something that I started becoming aware of in college, but then even more so after I graduated college. But even now, that doesn't make me an expert at it. So whether we've found out about it within the last 5 years or within the last 5 weeks, we are not experts. And it is our job to look to people who have been doing this work for years, who have started these movements, who have been on the streets, on the ground, already doing the work. It's not for us to suddenly show up really late to the party and feel like, oh, the party didn't start until we got here. You know, like, it's not our job to lead and crowd out the people who have actually been leading their own liberation for decades. Black people have been dealing with this for centuries. And as Patrisse points out multiple times, Black women really in large part are leaders of these movements. Black men as well, but again, with the Say Her Name movement, pointing out that men still often get a lot of the attention, even when it's Black women who are out there on the streets organizing and leading things. And Black queer and trans individuals as well. Black trans people are among some of the most vulnerable, as we are seeing lately how many we've lost this month, this week. So yeah, I really want to thank the people who have been doing this work for years, for decades, for centuries, and I want to remind my fellow white people that this is not our movement to lead, but it is for us to educate ourselves, make use of resources that are provided for us to educate ourselves, and don't ask for more labor from these people who are already doing so much work. Pay them for the work they've done if we are able, and if not, at least educate ourselves and help to bring this information to the people in our lives, and if we have a platform, to use it to amplify these messages, to amplify voices, not to drown them out, not to shout over them, you know? Yeah, but I really wanted to center this video in particular around this book, because I do like to talk about books that I've read every so often, and I just finished this one yesterday. So yeah, thank you, Patrisse. Thank you to everyone who's ever been involved in Black Lives Matter in any way, shape, or form whatsoever, and to all of us who will be or who are contributing in whatever ways we can right now. During pandemic, we might not all be out there in person, but helping from behind the scenes, again, backing people up, supporting the messages that are already being shared, and helping get these voices centered and present and out there even more so than they already have been for so long, right? And acknowledging that work. So, thank you again, and thank you for listening to or watching this video. I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.